kidnapped in the back of a truck.
Right.
Not really, but I've
Welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. Here's your host, Scott Cowan.
All right. Well, welcome back to this episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast. Today, I am talking with Paul D McKee. The D is important. He'll explain that in a minute. Paul, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking some time to chat with me.
You're welcome. Nice to see you, Scott.
So, Paul, I became aware of you because you bought me a coffee, and off of listening to a podcast about Tieton. It seems like all roads lead to Tieton in my world right now. It's just kind of interesting. And we started chatting, and you have a real interesting story. So I said, let's talk. So here we are.
Nice. I don't know, where do you want me to start?
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm going to let you figure out where we're starting. This is informal. Let's go.
Okay. Let's start with Tieton. Actually, yeah, let's start with Tieton. So, Tieton came up. I was listening to the podcast about Mighty Tieton with Ed Marquand, and I have a nonprofit gallery, and I thought, oh well, there's a buy you a coffee tip thing, and I'm like, I get it. People, you need those things to happen. So I did that, and then you got in touch with me, and the more we started talking, the connection to Tieton came up. I'm a sculptor and a painter, and I guess in 2010, I had entered a juried show with Mighty Tieton that was a chandelier festival, and I had driven to Tieton to take my chandelier over, and I remember the weather was absolutely horrible. I was much younger and not thinking, so I had nothing with me except for the chandelier and my truck. And I remember hitting the pass, and I'm like, wow, it's really snowing. And put chains on the truck. 5.5 hours later, got to Tieton, which it's a 2.5 hour drive from South Seattle. And I remember getting there, and I remember Ed calling me because he was in Seattle, and he said, Paul, you can't go back over the pass. And I'm like, well, I made it over. And he goes, no, it's closed. He said, you're not going anywhere. And I was like, oh. He said, well, I told him to turn the heat on in the apartment. And I'm like, oh, there's an apartment? And he's like, yeah. So I delivered my chandelier and stayed in Tieton for 3 days because I couldn't get back over the pass. And I remember hitting town. I mean, at the time then, Tieton there was even less going on there. There wasn't much. The little bakery store wasn't open past, 4 or 5. There was nothing open. The convenience store, and it was snowing, so of course everybody had gone home. There was no food. There was nothing anywhere. And Ed's like, well, you're gonna have to stay. Do you want to help hang this show? And I said, sure. Well, the crazy part about it, when you say all roads lead to Tieton, I at the time was managing a building in Pioneer Square, an all arts building. 2 of the gallery owners had purchased condos. One was one of the original purchasers when they developed the condos in the old packing facility. And so I met these 2 people that had, they're like, oh, we have condos in Tieton. I'm like, wow, you do? And then, because, for a town I'd never heard of it, and at first thought was like the Grand Tetons, and you had to look it up, and you're like, oh no, it's Tieton, Washington. And I remember a woman was there in the print shop at the time. They had a beautiful print making lab. And she and her husband had a condo there too. And they're like, oh, well, we'll make you dinner. And then somebody else brought me a toothbrush and a few things, it was just kind of that's kind of how it went. And then I remember standing and talking to this woman, and she introduced herself as Faye Jones. And I said, oh, that's funny. There's a Faye Jones in Seattle. And she laughed because she said, well, there's another Paul McKee in Seattle. And I said, yeah, no, there's 2 of us. And we're both artists. And I said, oh, is there another Faye Jones in Seattle? And she goes, no, honey, that's me. Faye Jones is a very well-known painter in Seattle, as is Robert Jones, who sadly has passed on at this point in time. Professor at the U, amazing painter. Here I am young artist sitting in their condo, being, like made beautiful Manhattans and a lovely like dinner in this little town in the middle of like what seemed like the middle of nowhere, snowed in for 3 days for a chandelier festival. And I'd never heard of the place before. Like you, it just continues. Like my partner and I bought a condo this last year in the same warehouse. And so now we have all these connections to like most of the people that you've done podcasts with. And it's funny because this many years later, 10 years later, I say Tieton and people are like, "Ooh, I'm so jealous." And I'm like, "Well, you know where Tieton is?" And they're like, "Oh yeah." And so it just gets a little more interesting. There's a ton that's happening there. So it's a fantastic kind of arts enclave place to be in as a creative person, to get away from the city and kind of hang out, different perspective.
Except for when it's snowing. It's
no,
not
I don't
that far away.
Oh, totally. It's 2.5 hours door to door.
Yeah.
And it's the most amazing part about it, I always tell Seattle people, is the second you come off the pass, you hit around, I don't know, Cle Elum, I guess. And the sun comes out and you're like, ooh, sun in the winter. What's that? And so like we go over there and, I grew up in a little tiny farm town in Kansas with a lot of snow. And so it's super reminiscent of like my childhood where you had to put sunglasses on because you're snow blind.
Right.
And that, I can't tell you the last time that happened in Seattle, that I was blind from the sun in the wintertime. So it's a nice respite. It's a great place to go kind of clear your mind and do your thing, hang out. I love it.
Well, what's funny is that we moved to Wenatchee in 2017, and I'd gone to college in Ellensburg, and I always liked Ellensburg, and I always thought, oh, maybe I'll stay in Ellensburg. Maybe I'll live in Ellensburg, and I couldn't convince anybody else in my family that was a good idea. So we settled on Wenatchee, and I love that it's cold, and yes, there's a lot of snow, but it's a lot of blue sky, and
I think there's been twice now we've gone over, and the sun did not appear on the other side of the mountains.
Oh,
and so
did you ask for your money back?
Yeah, I feel cheated. Like I get halfway to Tieton, I'm like, wait, it's raining. We got to turn around and go home, but we don't. It's just as beautiful.
So you've been involved in Tieton then since 2010.
Yes,
and the condo now. So how often are you going over?
Michael and I go over about once a month.
Okay.
So my husband also is working on. Oh, he did some computer coding camps with the high school this last summer.
Over there?
Yeah. So he's in the tech industry and has been since he was like 13 years old. And so he wanted to figure out how to kind of get involved. So he got involved with, he got involved with another guy, and then they developed this program, and he just kind of took it over. And so he did, I want to say 4 different week-long classes this summer in Tieton for coding, which is pretty cool. Cause Tieton is an apple town. It's very agriculturally driven. And not, it's not like a big city where you have every opportunity under the sun to like do whatever you want. So his classes were full, like all summer. It was great. He loved it.
Is he going to do it again?
I believe so. I think they're doing another set of it this summer through the high school again. So I kind of have to like look and see. I haven't asked him this year, like how that's going to work.
Okay. Yeah. That was, that's very cool that they were doing that, and that the kids were exposed and
totally.
We'll stay on Tieton for just a little bit longer.
Sure.
Tieton for 200 now. When you go over, when you're there, what's it like for you? Is it, I don't want to say, is it like vacation, but it's, what's a typical weekend look like?
I think the answer to that would have been very different before the pandemic. I don't know that we would have purchased the condo before the pandemic. We actually looked at the same condo for like 10 years that Ed had for sale. He used to run a business out of it, and we looked at it several times, and I actually really liked it. And I was like, 2.5 hours, that's a long way away. Are we really going to go? And then after the pandemic kicked in, everybody's kind of stuck at home, and and Ed had posted that the condo was for sale. And so we just decided in October 2 years ago, will be 3 years this year, to just drive over and look. And I was kind of surprised at how many people were in Tieton on a Saturday now, mingling around at Box Gallery or at one of the 2 restaurants or 3 restaurants, I should say now. It is, like I said, I grew up in a farm town. I grew up in a town of 3,000 people, 20 minutes south of Wichita in Kansas. And so the pandemic for me was kind of a reset to having to drive someplace. Like I didn't grow up in a city where it's like, oh, I can go here, I can go here, I can go here, I can catch the subway. It was if you're going to go to the mall, you had to plan and ask because it was a half-hour drive. Kind of the same thing in Tieton. We get over there and you kind of plan your time around, okay, we need to probably stop at the grocery store in Yakima on the way, or we'll go to Cowiche, which is a little town 5 minutes away. What you're going to do during that time is super based around whether there's 2 feet of snow on the ground or it's sunny. And Michael, I think, kind of uses it as, because he's in tech, it's kind of a place where he doesn't have to focus as much on work. And me, kind of same thing. It's like, okay, where are we going to walk the dogs? What are we going to do here? How are we going to slow down a little bit? Like I'm just not inundated with stuff. So it's just one of those places where we go and kind of relax for the weekend. And it's becoming less and less like vacation in a good way. Like it's, I have a studio there. Michael has an office there. We stayed for 3 weeks at Christmas. It was fantastic because it was just a little slower. We have friends that they'll try to do a Skype call with you and they're like, wait, the internet's not very good. And I'm like, well, we are in the middle of we're not really close to stuff. And so they always are like, why did you move there? And I'm like, for that reason. Right. We're not really close to stuff. It's just a place to kind of go calm down. And I don't know, it's super refreshing, I think. And it reminds me of also of like small town stuff where we just continue to meet more and more people with like similar values in like the arts, like what people are doing around the area in art, architecture, music. It's kind of crazy, like how much is really going on in that little town. It's awesome.
And I was totally dumbfounded when I shared my story with you of how I ended up there, literally kidnapped in the back of a truck.
Right.
Not really, but I followed of my own free will in my car, but it might as well have thrown me in the back of the truck. It was amazing. And I still, like I shared with you that I'm standing in the Mercantile and I'm looking and they have Filson and I'm just like, my like, Filson? What? And then I watch this guy buys a Filson vest and I'm just like, huh.
Yeah.
I would not have put Filson and Tieton in the same sentence.
Well, like I told you 10 years ago when I was there, the Mercantile was just Tieton made product. Craig hadn't opened the Mercantile side of it yet with Filson stuff. And like the day we went and looked at the condo, I was like, there were probably 40 people in town. And I was like, whoa, there's so many people here. Wow. And, Mike that works at the Mercantile also, he goes, oh no, it's kind of slow today. And I remember looking around like, wait, what? And he goes, oh yeah, it's kind of busy now. And then, that weekend, like I think the next weekend we went back and had dinner at like 617. It was packed. And I'm just looking around. I'm like, wow, there's a whole lot more here. Yeah. They've worked so hard to get this to happen. And it's happening. It's nice. Right. Like there's people there.
Right. And I'm looking forward to this year going and checking out the Grand Prix.
I am too. I've actually never gotten to see it because during COVID it was shut down. Right. And then before it was like, oh, we would have driven over and find a place to stay, which because we used to stay at El Nido in the past, and so now like I'm gonna get to go over and have a place to stay and watch the whole thing and just hang out for the whole weekend and enjoy it and be fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So when you're not hanging out in Tieton, you've got a nonprofit art gallery.
I do. People always laugh at me because they're like, what haven't you done in life? Like I started out in design school because I was told years ago, that I needed to be able to make a living. And going into the studio art profession, they're like, you're never going to make it, in small town Kansas. And so I went into the design world and was like, yeah, this is really not my thing. I don't know. There was something about it I couldn't kind of mesh with. And I remember taking, I had an alternative class I could pull on my schedule or something. And I took this foundation sculpture class and instantly fell in love. And so changed my major to, of course, to the dismay of my parents, who were terrified that I would be, homeless, like eating paint out of tubes. I don't know what they thought I was going to end up doing. But I was a professional florist for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which actually relates even into the sculptural part of my world. Everything I have done in my life has been based around the arts in some fashion, even like running a building. And I know this is the long way around that story. I do have a gallery, but the way I ended up with that gallery is I had been a display carpenter for the Bon Marché, and then of course when it turned to Macy's, and things had changed so drastically. And in 2005, my mother told me she had breast cancer, and I'm an only child. And I thought, well, I probably should pack it up and go back to Kansas. And I'd been in Seattle for 10 years. And I'm like, well, everything kind of pointed the right direction. I need to go do this. I'm like, I'll go home for 3 years and get a master's in sculpture with a teaching emphasis. Did that. At the time, started dating somebody here in Seattle from Wichita, which actually worked out really nicely for grad school. And then decided that we would continue moving on. And so I moved back here in 2008 with Michael. And at the time, I needed a studio. Anyone in Seattle knows studio rent is very expensive, kind of hard to come by. And the Toshiro Kaplan building that's in Pioneer Square, actually, I was on an art walk one night on a Thursday, and there was a studio available for like $600, which was huge. And that's unheard of. For somebody in a small town, $600 might be their mortgage. And I'm like, dude, for studio rent, that's good. So I remember I called and they're like, yeah, it's all, it had been rented actually. And she said, but I don't believe it until there's a check on the table. And so like a week later, she called me back and she said, they fell through. Do you want this space? And I said, yeah, I'll take it. Well, a few weeks later, the woman who was running the entire building decided she had been there long enough and she was going to move on to different things. And so I just instantly said, who do I call about your job? Because I'd actually run an apartment building. I'd done some random things like any artist in town had done. And so in 2009, I took a job managing all the commercial space at the Toshiro Kaplan building in Pioneer Square, which is an all arts building. And it in itself is run by a nonprofit organization based out of Minneapolis called Art Space. And so took this on, managed it for quite a few years, changed a few locations with my studio. And then one day there was a basement that used to fill up with water. It had seen better days and needed some love. And it's just it's a 100-year-old building in Pioneer Square. They all kind of look like that. And I remember I was in the basement talking to my boss, and the woman's name was Catherine Vandenbrink, brilliant jewelry maker. She was the VP for the West Coast for Art Space at the time. And she said, oh, I should just put somebody down for X amount of dollars. Nobody's ever going to rent this. And I got this really strange twitch in my head. And I said, I think I want this. And she's like, no, Paul, you really don't want this. And I'm like, no, I think I do. She's like, okay, well, call Art Space and start chatting. And so I remember telling Michael, my husband, that, I was looking at this thing. And he's like, oh, okay. And I don't think he realized that I might pull the trigger and run forward. Because I came home one night and I said, so I just rented 4,000 square feet of that daylit basement for 10 years. And he said, have you lost your mind? And I'm like, I may have, I don't know, but I rented it. And the reason he said it is here we were in the house with animals. I think I had chickens at the time. I've got my own art business. I'm running a building. I'm teaching a class or two at Cornish. And he's like, when are you going to do this? I'm like, I didn't have any money to do this. And I said, I don't know, but we're going to make it work. And so I remember telling the neighbors, like my neighbor to my studio was Pratt Fine Arts Center had an offsite gallery, and the woman who ran it would later become one of my business partners. And one of the volunteers happened to be my neighbor, like literally by our house. And she said, Paul, I want to open an arts, like a gallery for art for sculptors. And we started talking. And I said, you know what? So I rented this thing. I might be able to build some space in for us. And she's like, wow, really? And I said, yeah, let's think about this. So I worked on this space for a year on my own. I couldn't afford to hire anybody. One of my friends, Chris Cooperrider, helped me hang sheetrock. Like people helped me get discounts on stuff. It was insane. It worked beautifully. I would go to work at the building, and then I would teach my class at Cornish, and I would come home and like throw dinner down, pet the dogs, say hi to Michael, and then run back and work and clean until like 1 or 2 in the morning and start over again the next morning. And in 2013, I got everything done, and there were 4 of us that opened Method Gallery, which is at the time was not a nonprofit. It took us about 3 years of self-funding before we actually decided we probably should do this. And so over the years now, there's 2 of us left. It started out, it was myself, June Sekaguchi, Mary Koss, and Paula Stokes, and now it's Paula and I. And we're almost 10 years in. We show nothing but installation-based art, kind of specific to our space. So we ask artists that we find people and we curate. And so we ask people to take into consideration like the building, the location, maybe the age of the building, the historical properties of it. And so when we went to the nonprofit side of stuff, we decided that because it's kind of an underserved area, and honestly, from the get-go, we had provided this to underserved artists to start with. Mm-hmm. Nothing like I have nothing against straight white men in their 60s, but over the years they've gotten a lot of stuff. So early on we decided to focus on like, hey, can we show artists in other categories? So female, like women artists, female identifying artists, LGBTQIA artists. We tried to really focus, and then still we had like, you know, a straight white guy would show with us, but we pushed really hard to show underserved artists in an underserved community. Because it's not like a regular gallery show where you can just walk in and put 12 paintings up. And the places for those artists are kind of few and far between. And it's not at anybody's fault. It's not, you know, because galleries are evil. It's because galleries need to make money. Mm-hmm. And it's much easier for them to show 12 sellable pieces than it is this giant installation piece that really doesn't have a price tag on it. And it's not going to go in somebody's living room. Right. So that's why we went to the nonprofit side of stuff. That's kind of how we started Method Gallery. Like, okay. And like I said, it's been 10 years. It's amazing. Almost.
Well, you glossed over something.
Oh, okay.
You said you were standing in a basement that flooded.
Oh, yes.
So is this like an aquatic gallery
no.
where the pieces float, or how did we solve this basement flooding issue?
So my boss at the time, of course, like I said, I'm in the old part of Pioneer Square. There is actually an areaway outside of my part of the space and the studio area that is underground, like what you would take on the underground tour.
Okay.
It's propped up with timbers. It's insane. It leaks like a sieve. And she had always said that it leaked from this giant crack in the street. And it does, honestly. It leaks over on that side a little bit. But what was in the process at the time was having the roof replaced.
Okay.
And it's 4,000 square feet of, roof. Right. And it was quite old. Not much had been there for years. Well, when it filled up, it was coming from, this is insane. There's a sunken part of the roof that a skylight sets in.
All right.
Which is like a small in-ground pool, honestly. And so the drain would back up. It would fill up and run into these they're beautiful glass, like this kind of like an apiary or like a sunroom window, and it would get high enough, like 3 feet deep, and start pouring in through those. So it would follow the support structure into the basement. And the business above them, they kept having problems with this thing filling up, which is why we finally like had the roof redone and did a bunch of stuff to it. But that's where most of the water was coming from.
Okay.
So that kind of mitigated itself pretty quickly with that. And we're lucky it did, because we actually set above the parking garage to the building next door, which is still part of the same company. But we realized that when my space would fill up with water, it meant there was about an Olympic-sized pool of water pressing on the garage wall next door, slowly making its way through. Yeah, nothing's going to happen there. So that was remediated. So no, it's still every now and then people walk in, they're like, "Oh, it smells musty in here," and I'm like, "Yeah, a little bit." It's a basement space in historic Pioneer Square, and then it'll just stop and smell normal. So it's just something we kind of got used to. But no, it's not underwater anymore, thankfully.
Okay.
I'm lucky.
So for those of us that aren't in the art world, what's the mechanics of a non-profit art gallery? How does that work?
I giggle a little bit because we've been open long enough. People like, they want to see our kind of business model, like what we do. Well, the 4 of us that started it, and then the 2 of us are still there, we have always been volunteers. So Paula and I volunteer our entire time to curate, run, like facilities, all of it. The artists that come to us are never charged to actually show with us.
Okay.
The reason we became a nonprofit is we had people that wanted to give us money. And at the time, the tax laws were different, where you could donate X amount and actually write something off. Like now it's way higher. But at the time we needed to be able to take, a donation for $500, a donation for $1,000. And truth be told, we tried to quit 3 years in. After we'd self-funded, we're like, yeah, okay, we've done this for 3 years. Maybe we need to stop. And all of our friends in the community were like, no, whoa, what are you doing? You can't leave. And we're like, well, yeah, no, we need to stop this. We're out of pocketing all of this. They're like, why don't you have a fundraiser? That's when we became involved with an organization called Shunpike, which is King County's cultural arts funding organization. They're a 501c3. So really, we're an umbrellaed entity under a 501c3. Okay. But honestly, that is how we've made it all these years. We volunteer our time for installs. Paula does all the press, all the bookkeep, like all the paperwork kind of stuff that we do. I do all the physical maintenance and installation stuff on site because I built everything out. I kind of knew exactly everything worked anyway. So I take care of all that. We set on Fridays, and then we have 4 awesome volunteers that sit with us on Saturdays. So we're only open on Friday and Saturday. And the rest of the time, we have literally just asked people for money. And if anyone has ever told you you have to ask, it's impossible for me not to understand that wholly now. Because the first year that we asked, we did a little tiny fundraiser. I got we used our friend's studio. We had some food donated through some people I knew with a restaurant. I had some wine. We bought wine at Costco, I think is what we did. I can't remember what we did. And that night we just asked people, we're like, hey, will you give us $100 a couple if that works for you? I don't know how, but we walked away that night with $15,000.
Oh, okay.
And the next year it was 19. The next year after that, it was 25.
Are you still buying Costco wine?
Yeah, totally. Well, and also Paula's husband's a corporate lawyer for Costco. So Costco, and they're good. They're a good local company. We're not getting a discount for doing that. They have a good price for us to buy a decent tasting wine to have at a talk, whatever when we do a private event. But that honestly, it's just been to ask. And what we provided, I think people recognized that what we provided to the arts community as a whole was good enough, if not exceeded what needed to happen. So they gave us money. and they've happily given us money ever since, which is fantastic. We're super thankful.
Once again, I'm not an art guy. So you said earlier that the sculptures that you work with are doing pieces that will fit in your space.
Right.
Okay.
No, you're fine.
So what happens after they're done showing with these?
Well, that's the plight of every installation artist in the world. I focused heavily on installation work. Mary Koss did as well, and public art. Paula is a glass blower and has taken on installation on the side as well. And then Jun Sakaguchi, tons of public art and installation work. The hardest part about it is you're asked to take a space and change it into something that it's not. It's expensive. I'm not going to say it's not. My average shows would take, a year of my work and anywhere from $1,000 to $8,000 worth of like materials and stuff. And just to turn this thing out that, for 6 weeks you have. The problem is then when you're done, you have the product of 6 weeks in your studio. And you're like, oh, what do I do with this? In my case, it was upholstered items. It was giant taxidermy like human deer forms that were hot pink with lipstick on. It was insane. Nobody wants a hot pink like gay deer over their bed. Nobody. They don't want it in their living room either. It scares them. So you figure out like, okay, can I do this again? Like, where else am I going to show this? Or like in my case, for my thesis show, I had a professional photographer take images, and I used those kind of as my calling card, which honestly is what an awful lot of the artists that we've shown over the years have done. It's a place and a chance for you to make something that you may never get the chance again to do. So I think that's why it's so important in the community that like we're there. It's you don't get these opportunities very often, and so that's why we offer it. But yeah, you end up, it stacks in your garage, under your bed, in your studio. It's everywhere. It's kind of hard to do sometimes.
Okay. Are what show is going on right now? Do you have something on?
Oh yeah. Right now we have Karen Lene Rude. She's amazing. She happened to be an acquaintance of Paula, and Paula really she proposed the show to me, and Karen does these amazing. So she's doing kind of two lines of things. She's working with paper that has been a donation from one of the paper mills. She lives up north in Port Townsend, and she sews these amazing clothing out of like brown craft paper. They're ridiculously detailed. They're beautiful. And then at the same time, she works with a ton of recycled material. And right now she also is making these things where she tears apart printers and electronic kind of things, and then builds these little kind of long vignettes that sit on a wall. And it's almost looking like a shadow box of a city, like town street. There's like little houses, little telephone poles, little smokestacks. It's crazy. And it's all recycled material, and you'd never know that's what they were. It's a beautiful show.
So she's the one responsible for getting rid of all these printers that we've all accumulated over the years.
Well, at least
for 6 months and then stop.
A few of them. Yes.
Gosh.
I mean, that's her big, the background for her work right now is the recycled part of what we leave kind of as a society. Like, what is it that, when they dig the ground up, level of dinosaur, level of Seattle 2022, level of, it's that. She really focuses on kind of how and what we leave.
Okay. What's coming up later this year?
Oh gosh, you caught me off guard. This is what happens after 10 years. You're like, well, let's look up our own website. Wait, it's terrible to say that, but it actually happens. There's a awesome woman. We usually do a call every year for art, And there's a lovely woman in Portland named Jaleesa Johnson who is going to be doing a show with us. We're super excited about. And then Ben Wright is new to the Seattle area. He is a glassblower, and he is the director for Pilchuck up north.
Okay.
So he's going to be showing with us. And then there's a trio in October that's going to be doing some more work with us. That it's one that will fully take up. They're actually building in kind of this flowy, it's almost like a carpet floor that you can get under. And it's this crazy hot pink. Like it's hard to explain. It's amazing. I'm hoping it works out this year and they can pull it off, because it's a good idea. It's a really good idea. But this is the crazy part. Like when you ask about how do we sustain ourselves? I always giggle because I'm like, well, we don't have any money. We don't make any money. And then most of the artwork that shows up, we've never seen. We've seen a concept sketch, and we've only had a couple of like ultimate failures, and they've come through and said, oh, these were ultimate failures. And we've just kind of had to figure out how to make them work. But like these, like, I don't know what these three artists are doing. I do. I have this concept sketch, but do I have photos of the work? No, it doesn't exist.
So they're going to show up and do the installation.
Well, before
and
that,
you're gonna walk in and go, huh?
Yeah. Well, it's not that. I'm not that quite that giving. We do a couple of like we'll do a little talk with them prior, and then Paul and I will do a studio visit either via Zoom or something ahead of time. Just we learned early on to say, hey, are you having some problems? Like, is everything okay? Like, do you need something? Because we've had a couple of artists, like one needed something, and come to find out it was something that Mary had in her garage later, and they couldn't afford to buy it. So we've learned to ask with stuff like that.
Okay,
but yeah, so that's for this year, and then we'll set up again for next year and see how it goes. We probably won't be around forever. It's a volunteer endeavor that it does take up an awful lot of time. And the thing about it is, there's a gallery there, but in that 4,000 square feet, I also have my studio plus 6 studios that I rent to other people that I have to maintain. And, and it's not a ton of money that I make off of that, but it provides me a studio space, and it provides my tenants a nice studio space that you can bring like a patron into. Like the bathroom's clean. You can make them a cup of coffee. Like it's got a good functioning workspace in it. So that takes up my time too.
Okay.
And I still have animals and a husband and a house, and now 2 houses. So, it all adds up.
Well, what are you working on artistically in your studio right now?
There was some real talk with COVID that happened. I left running the Toshiro Kaplan building commercial side. Let me think. When did COVID start? 2019.
Like 17 years ago?
Yeah. So in 2019, I left my job in October. No. In 2018.
Okay.
I left my job in October to teach. I taught woodshop at Cornish and the Art Institute, like college level freshmen, for about 10, 12 years. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to teach woodshop out of my studio. Because there's a lot of people out there that have home wood shops. Like either their partner has stuff and they don't know how to use it. I'm like, I'm going to teach these people how to use home wood shop stuff. This is going to be great. I'm going to have 4 or 5 students at a time. Well, I did that. And then, oh, look, February of 2019, COVID rolls around. So all of a sudden I didn't have a job. I was making a little bit of work. I'll be honest and say I haven't made a lot over the last 9 years. The space took away. It didn't take away. I gave it a lot of my own like time and love. And so people would ask me what I was working on. I'm like, hey, look at this wall. look how beautifully perfect this wall is. Like the drywall on it's been put up perfectly, and it's been mudded and taped nicely. And they're just like, what are you talking about? I'm like, dude, that's my work. That's all I've done. So I continued to make a little bit of work here and there. I started to work again this last year and have run across a couple of health issues. Like I threw a disc out of my back this summer. It kind of kept me down a little bit. And then I found I had this crazy rare, weird cancer in my ear that I'm going through treatment for right now. So I kind of keep getting set back a little bit, but the plan is now to head back in the studio. I'll be done with treatment in May. So this summer, I've never been a big summer worker in the studio because it's beautiful in Seattle. And why else would you why not be outside? So I have a feeling this fall
only 2
again.
days.
No, it's just 2
2
maybe
days.
a week. But
Maybe.
the plan is to get back in the studio again and start a new body of work on something I've never done. The idea of doing installation work now it's rough. There's just not much money available for that kind of stuff anymore. So I need to make a little more manageable, smaller stuff. And honestly, after this whole like weird rare cancer thing, I think there might be some changes to my work of how I make work literally that I want to make. Like not what somebody else thinks I should make, not what my like local art world thinks I should make, but literally just like, nope, I'm going to make this because I want to explore these things. So
Okay.
I'm looking forward to it. I just need to get back in the studio again. That's the hardest part.
COVID has disrupted so many things in so many different ways, and people respond to it differently, but I think one thing, no matter what, I think we can all agree it's been extremely disruptive.
It has. And I'm not going to say that all of that disrupt has been negative either. I will say I have those 6 studios. I have lost 2 tenants due to kind of pandemic related stuff. But the thing I realized was I worked really hard over the years to get tenants that I kind of curated for the space. I treated the space as mine and that we all shared a space. And it was like, how would I want to be treated? How would I want the space to look? During the entire early COVID stuff, I remember I was going down and cleaning incessantly. That part was tough. And I remember asking my tenants at one point, I'm like, you guys, I just can't keep up with this. I need you to set up a schedule. We have to close. I need you to pay rent. Which is, that's a hard thing to ask somebody when they're paying for a space that they can't be in except for X amount of hours a week. Not a single artist in my space kind of kicked back. They all were like, nope, perfectly fine. And so they kept the schedule. We all worked together to figure out how to make it happen. They paid rent because I think they realized that the type of landlord I am, I'm not making a ton of money off of them. I'm there kind of in it with them. And that if I went away, like I wasn't being given a break on the rent. And if I went away, they didn't have a space anymore.
Right.
So we all literally worked together. And I think that's the kind of stuff that has happened with COVID. It has taught all of us to slow down ever so slightly and pay attention to stuff and figure out like what's important to us. What have we built that's good? What have we built that was terrible? I mean, there are things, my big thing was I would go to so much stuff. I would like try to smile and keep up and go to these things. And some of it's age, some of it's COVID. That now I'm just like, I don't have to go. Like, it's fine. It's more important to stay home.
Well, isn't it interesting that not you, just you specifically, because I'm very similar here. It's given me permission to say no to the marginally interesting things.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't, before I'm kind of like you, I'd be like, yeah, okay, I'll go. We'll do that because I need to for this reason or that reason, and I'll go. And my heart wasn't into it.
Sure.
And so now I try to have I try, and this is, I'm making air quotes, I try. It's either hell yes or no.
Right.
And I don't quite get that emphatic, but I say no a lot more than I have, and there's been some good things.
Yeah.
And it's there's things that I miss, don't get me wrong, things I miss, choices I make now that I for example, I was going to go to a concert in Seattle, and I just said, I don't think I want to do that this year. I think I can skip that. And that artist should be around for a few more years. I should be around for a few more years. I can go another time.
Right. Well, and I don't know, prior to the pandemic, when I was working so much, the studio, gallery, working in the building, teaching, it all kind of taught me. One year I said, I'm having a year of no. And so there's a thing in Seattle where people always laugh because they're like, people are like, oh, we should have coffee, which really is, it's nice to see you. I'm never going to call you to have coffee, but it's nice to see you. And then other times it's like, no, we should really have coffee. And I remember saying yes to these things constantly. And finally I was like, I'm so exhausted. I have to learn how to say no. And so people would be like, hey, we'd really like you to show for this thing. And it would be so unmutually beneficial that I was on the losing end of like my time and effort, and I wasn't really going to gain anything. And so I just learned that I would just stand there and go, no. And people would look at me kind of strange. I'm like, no. And I think what has happened with COVID is people don't look at me strangely anymore. I'm just like, yeah, no, sorry. And they're not offended. No. I think we all just realized that what our priorities were in life, they changed when you see what, kind of you look back and you're like, okay, these are the things that made me happy. I'm going to continue doing this, which is what I'm doing now. It absolutely now, especially, a friend of mine was telling me, she's like, man, you're in trouble. She's like, you throw over 50 cancer and this on the fire. And she's like, you're like this now, man, wait till you're 60, wait till you're 70. And I just giggle and I'm like, I know, I'm kind of looking forward to that, where I can just be like, yeah, I don't need to do that. That's fine. That'll move on its own. And I'm going to be happy over here. I'm going to do what I love. So good at you, but I'm not going.
Well, it's funny. So in my background, you'll see over what shoulder is it? My left shoulder. There, you'll see a little poster on the wall. That's from the Tieton Grand Prix. I wouldn't have thought 2 years ago that I'd go watch little 6 horsepower race cars drive around a town, but I'm looking forward to it this year. Like crazy looking forward to it. There's things in life that, and this is one of the things where Michael and I have decided, like for Tieton, we'll drive over because like we'll try to kind of plan out when we're going. Like it's like a little mental health, like, hey, let's go for the weekend. And then even I remember after I got my diagnosis one day, I looked at Michael and I said, I want to go to Tieton this weekend. I don't want to have to think about anything. I just want to go over, take the dogs out to like Cowiche Canyon or over to Snow Mountain Ranch, which are like their land preserves. And then there's just beautiful walks. Plus, I don't know, this time of year, there's no rattlesnakes. So I'm way more apt to like be out there rattlesnake free. Yes.
But but it's just one of those things where it's like, nope, I'm taking a mental health break. Whereas before we didn't. And so it excites me. Going. Oh, absolutely. And the stuff like the Grand Prix in Tieton, same thing. I'm totally looking forward to it. Yeah. I think some of it too is it's a little safer. It's a little more outside. It's a little more, there's people around. It's not in a big town. Like, this will be great. I'm ready to go.
Well, I interviewed Ed and we were talking about the Grand Prix, and he was just very calm in his description of it. Do this.
Yes.
And just his demeanor, right? His public facing demeanor is very just calm. And then I go find YouTube videos of it. And I'm like, this is nuts. This would be great.
Yeah.
How did he not sell me on this?
Ed is super calm though. He's like St. Patrick marching all the snakes into town instead of out of town. It's awesome.
Yeah. And I'm watching these videos of these guys, and they're crafting these cars basically to send them to their destruction over a weekend. And
yeah, I've never seen it in person. I'm excited to see it.
Yeah,
it's gonna be fun.
And I wouldn't have thought of that 2 years ago.
Absolutely.
That's not something that would have probably popped up on my radar.
Oh, absolutely.
you live in Seattle. So what brought you to Seattle?
Well, that's a whole short story. I was very fine in Wichita, Kansas. My appendix had lacerated, and 4 months later, after I'd seen 4 different doctors, I was like, I don't feel good. And they're like, you know what? You're young. You work in a bar. You're going to college. I'm like, no, something doesn't feel right. Well, what had happened is my appendix had lacerated, and I had emergency appendectomy surgery at the age of 24 and almost died. And I remember coming out of it, and they're like, you had about 5 hours to live. And I was like, you know what? I'm not dying in Wichita, Kansas. And so I packed up in that summer and like took a Greyhound bus to Tennessee, one way, and then ended up in the Olympics, working at like one of the Olympics facilities in Atlanta, and then hitchhiked my way back to Wichita through people I had met. But it's still hitchhiking. My mother was mortified when I told her the true story of like all this, how I kind of got around and got back. Because a friend of mine was like, hey, I'm moving to Seattle. I don't want to be in Wichita anymore. And she was a really good friend of mine from Kansas and Wichita. And she was like, do you want to go? And I said, I've never been there. And she goes, so? And I said, yeah, I think I do.
Okay.
And so I think it's been 25 years ago now. In 96, I rolled into Seattle like November 8th with 4 bags, no job. She had a job. Somehow she'd gotten a job. We both worked in the market for those first like few months, and I honestly just never left. Like there's something about the weather and that I absolutely love. I complain about the rain, but man, when it's not there, I complain that it's not there because I'm like, oh, I'm so dried out. I'm like, I'm just getting to that point, but I love it. I've loved it here. It's I should say it's hard for me to watch the city change so drastically over 25 years. It's not that it's a bad thing. It's just, it's hard for me to watch it because Seattle was a very different place in 1996 when I moved here. It was a very different place in the arts, in like music, anything that was kind of community driven. It was just a very different place. You could do a lot more. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, it was cheaper. So you could write a play and find a space to rent for, $600 for the entire month and show as many productions as possible. And people would come. So it's hard to see it do that, but I don't know. That's how I ended up here. And every time we think about leaving, I'm like, I don't know. Can I do that? Like, I don't know if I can pull it off quite yet. I'm not ready.
Okay. So, coffee is the official state drink.
It is.
And I think, did you have to take the entrance test to Seattle by showing how much coffee you could consume?
I drink so much coffee. It's sad.
No.
We bought an espresso. Michael bought me an espresso machine for my 50th birthday 2 years ago. And it was to not drink a pot of coffee. Well, yeah, because I would drink pots of coffee. And so I got this espresso machine. I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to get up and like make my coffee. It's not just there. There's still days, 4 espressos in. I'm like, maybe I should do the decaf one this afternoon. It's a bit much.
That's just quackery.
Yeah. So no, I love my coffee. Don't kid yourself.
So where's a great place for me to go get coffee in Seattle that I might not have heard of? Which I'm going to
give you 2. So in Pioneer Square, there's this really great place on Main called Elm Coffee Roasters. They roast their own coffee, beautiful space. The coffee's fantastic. Like, I love it. It reminds me of the old school, like when Seattle was starting out with its coffee kind of venture. Instead of a cool, hip, really, like, don't kid yourself. It's cool and hip, but it's a really good coffee. Like, I like it.
Okay.
And then in Columbia City, I've lost what I was going to tell you. Oh, sorry. Empire is down the street from us. It has changed hands, I think, once. It's on Angeline Street, just off of Rainier. The guy that opened it was a cyclist, and coffee and waffles and soccer were super important to him. That was his whole livelihood. So the coffee was amazing. The soccer, I think, is still pretty hefty in that space. With I think that some of the baristas bought it. Again, great cup of coffee. And there are places where you have to wait a little bit longer.
Okay.
So it's the slow down, do your thing. But
yeah,
I don't know. Those are two of my go-tos that I go to a lot, honestly.
So what beans are you using in the espresso machine at home?
Honestly, it's PCC.
Okay.
The PCC house brand. I've figured out there's a combination, and I know you scoffed at the decaf part, but there's a combination of decaf, like a light roast, and a decaf dark roast that I mix to do a half calf every day.
Okay.
It's actually pretty decent. I like it.
I will share one with you that you probably haven't heard of. I went over to their roastery and unfortunately my equipment, well, I can't blame my equipment. The operator, I wish I was somebody other than myself, did not turn on the microphone.
Oh.
And so we had a great long conversation, the two owners and I, and it's called Talking Crow.
Oh, no.
Coffee.
Never heard of it. I'll look them up.
And they're primarily like 95% decaf. They make, and so they made me an espresso, and it was absolutely, my thing with decaf isn't, it's just not, I have really never found that many decafs that were palatable to me. Like,
correct.
Not noticeably deficient. And I'm not a coffee snob. I don't mean to sound like that, but, because if truth be told, I drink my Keurig coffee. I can't make fun of anybody if I'm admitting to that. And my wife brought home Folgers decaf Keurig K-cups, and I'm like, I should just end my life right now, because there's nothing more humiliating. And honestly, I'm saying this, and I will publish it. It was actually maybe the best decaf out of that Keurig I've ever had.
Nice.
And that's just sad. But this Talking Crow, they air roast their coffee. Their decaf is amazing. I was shocked. I actually bought some and I've enjoyed it at my house.
Do they decaffeinate it with
looking
water?
for a good decaf,
or do you know?
They use the Swiss water.
Yeah, that's
beans out of Vancouver.
That's a big difference, because like the coffee that I grew up at decaf would have been like chemically processed, and it made it taste terrible. And especially, I was a barista for a while. Like I said, there's not much I haven't done. So I worked at an awesome little place called Joe Bar on Capitol Hill that's still there, and that I remember that our decaf coffee was terrible, but and the guy that taught me to barista, he's like, oh, that's awful. That's something you don't ever put together with espresso. And I'm like, but there are people that really can't handle the caffeine part of it. So I've always, and I think the PCC one is water, Swiss water. But you're right. Like decaf is tough, but I'm also one of those people that for a while to have decaf coffee, like my grandparents owned a diner. And so I grew up with a percolator of coffee next door constantly. I think they just added more water to it with more beans. I don't think they ever washed it.
I don't think it was beans. It was just pre-ground.
Oh yeah. Well, that's what I mean. Like it was Folgers, like straight out. But I don't think I think they just dumped it and added more. But so Michael would laugh at me because I would get like the taster's choice, like, decaf, like crystal ones. He's like, how can you drink that crap? And I'm like, it's so good. It tastes like truck stop coffee. I love truck stop coffee.
Dad.
Yeah. It's familiar, I think, is what it is. Why I like it. I don't know that it actually tastes good.
No, it doesn't. Let's be honest with each other, but there's a familiarity to it. It's like, okay.
So, but yeah, those are my things.
When you're not running a nonprofit gallery, and you're not going over to Tieton.
Yep.
What do you like to do in the greater Seattle area?
I will tell you, we are fortunate to have a place in Columbia City on a corner. I have a space for a garden. The floral part of me, my grandmother was a huge flower grower. My mom's parents were Depression era. They were older they were in their 70s when I was born. So like their thing was to grow everything canned stuff. My grandmother grew flowers, vegetables. It's one of those things I absolutely love to spend time like that in the yard. I can work 12 hours and come home and work in the yard for 6 and not even realize it.
Okay.
And it's the same kind of thing in the studio. I have a deal. I'm kind of a tinkerer. Like I love if somebody's like, hey, can you do this thing? And I'm like, yeah. And so it doesn't feel like work to me. I can literally just kind of tinker around and like make the stuff I have or need, or I don't know. It's stuff that keeps me busy with my hands. Other than that, there's a lot of like Michael and I go to Seward Park. We're fortunate to have that park, within 10 minutes of our house. Mm-hmm. Drive down and all of a sudden, you're in an old growth forest and the dogs love it. It's like getting away. The water's right there. And so it's a lot of, if I can stay active, moving outdoors, it's probably one of my favorite things.
Okay.
Or tinkering on something.
Like get out of jail free question. This is always, I say this every episode. Okay. What didn't I ask you that I should have?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I don't know that you didn't ask me anything incorrectly. There's a lot there that I don't know. Even in an hour, it's pretty hard to toss out there. I do a lot of stuff. I don't know. I pride myself into being that guy that can teach you how to use a table saw and not cut your hand off.
So do you have all 10?
I do.
Fingers and thumbs?
Okay. I almost lost my thumb 4 years ago. Uh-huh. I kept telling my eye doctor that my glasses, I had to go to bifocals a few years ago. And I kept saying, I feel like these are the wrong distance for the table saw. And she said, well, where's the table saw? And I put my hands out and, trying to show her. And she goes, yeah, no, you're right. Well, I went to move a board and I probably, like Michael tells me, I was stupid to not use a push stick, but it was far away from the blade. Well, it wasn't. And so I basically just touched the blade with my thumb. That is the closest thing I've ever come. And I've never had a student get hurt. Okay. I'm kind of a pushy shop teacher. Like my big thing has always been that tool will kill you. Have some respect.
Yeah.
Like don't be scared of it, but have some respect. A friend of mine and I were talking about this last night. I said, I always looked at my female students were almost always the best shop people because they had some serious like respect for a tool, but then they took the time to like make it do what it needed to do. And I could always find it was usually a woman in the class as my freshman, their eyes were the size of like saucers, just, cause they're like, there's no way. And I'm like, no, come up here with me. You're terrified. You're going to do the first like cut of the class. And they're just like, no. Okay. And I'm like, no, you'll do great at this. Let's do it. So nope. They have all their digits. I have all mine. Super fortunate. But like an old guy told me years ago that was he was a carpenter in like visual art and the visual stuff like for Macy's for the Bond. And he said, man, the second you lose respect for that tool, it will bite you. He said, and it's when you'll get hurt, when you forget you're doing something repetitive so I've always just kind of kept that in mind. It's like pride myself in no, you need to have this on. Michael laughs at me.
That's why you drink all the coffee is to stay alert.
Absolutely. And you can overdo the coffee and be in the table saw too.
Yeah, that's a very, very true statement.
But no, I have them all.
Where can people find out more about the gallery? They want to look it up.
So there's 2 places you can go. You can either go to methodgallery.com, which will take you straight there. Or if you want to know a little bit more information about the space that Method is housed in, it's called Project 106. And you can go to project-106.com. And it will take you to Method. It will take you to my personal page. And I think I can't remember what it is. Not right now.
Okay.
But yeah, look us up.
We'll put those in the show notes.
Please do. Come visit.
Well, thank you for taking the time to chat. And this is a lot of fun. And I'm looking forward. Our paths will cross in June for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And look forward to, I'll come over. I'm going to come over and check out the gallery too. I want to get next. I'm building a pretty long, extensive list of things to do next time I come to Seattle. I might have to stay for a few days, which will be fun.
That's not a bad thing. Yeah, call.
No,
I'll meet you at the gallery.
We'll do that. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Scott. Nice to talk to you.
Join us next time for another episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast.